So I'm working on a horror history script about a villain who has sparked a lot of debate among fans, with many people taking this villain's side and saying that this person was actually justified. I'm not ready to say who that person is yet, but it got me thinking, are there any villains who are actually doing the right thing? So I put up a post asking my audience for input, challenging you guys to name a villain who was in the right. And I also spent the day thinking about it and basically decided, no, if they were in the right, then they wouldn't be considered the villain, right? But after mulling this over a little bit further, I do think that there may be a couple villains who qualify. To find out who, stick around to the end of this video. So when I started thinking about the villains that come to mind and looking at some of the answers that you guys provided, I started seeing a few trends. There were a few different categories that all of these villains seem to fall into. But let's lay down the technical definitions before continuing. So a villain is a character whose evil actions or motives are important to the plot. The protagonist is just the leading character in a work of fiction, and the antagonist opposes that leading character. Usually the antagonist is the villain, but in some cases the protagonist is the villain. I went into this video thinking that there wouldn't be any examples of villains who I found to have actions that were just, but some of these characters surprised me, just as you were probably surprised that I finally uploaded something other than horror history. Also, seeing as how this isn't an episode of horror history, I won't go too in depth into any of the characters that I talk about here, but there may be spoilers for the following stories, primarily Gone Girl and Cabin in the Woods. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the first category. In my post, there was one character who was the overwhelming favorite in the replies, and that was Carrie White from Stephen King's Carrie. To which I have to say, are you kidding me? Carrie White was not in the right. Now, I did kind of bait people by putting her in the image, but still, the fact that so many people chose her is kind of concerning. Carrie is a teenage girl who is abused at home by her overly religious mother while being bullied and socially outcast at school by her cruel classmates. When Carrie hits puberty, it coincides with an awakening of her telekinetic powers. So when one of her classmates orchestrates an extremely cruel prank by dumping pig's blood on her at the senior prom, Carrie snaps, kills her classmates, then rampages into the town and massacres it, starting a huge fire and telekinetically twisting the fire hydrant lug nuts so tight that the fire department could not access the water. Now, I'm not saying that Carrie is pure evil and the people who bullied and abused her are perfect angels. They can both be bad, and they are, but two wrongs do not make it right. If someone does something to you and you do it back to them, you're now on the same level. But Carrie is even worse than that, because she not only got revenge on her bullies, but also killed innocent people. Attacking in self-defense is okay, but that's not what's going on here. If we were to take telekinetic abilities out of the equation here for a moment, this is essentially a school shooting. Nobody is out there saying that the Columbine shooters did the right thing by shooting up their school because they were bullied. So why are people saying that about Carrie? I'm guessing it's because in the movie, the story is told from Carrie's point of view. We see the bullying, and I think it's normal to feel bad for her. I'm guessing a lot of people who said Carrie have been bullied themselves at some point, and they're able to share in her frustration and want to protect her because they relate to her in some small way. And I think there's just a little bit of a disconnect here. I can understand thinking that the antagonist deserves some kind of punishment, and maybe some people got that mixed up with saying that Carrie was in the right. There were several answers that I put under the same category of they deserved it though. Amazing Amy Dunn from Gone Girl staged her disappearance to make it look like her husband had killed her to get back at him for his infidelity. But she also murders an innocent guy who took her in. Another example is Frankenstein's monster from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The monster was created by a scientist named Victor Frankenstein, obsessed with the idea of creating life. Maybe just get a GF, my guy. Repulsed by his creation, Victor abandons the monster, who then tries to connect with other humans who are afraid of him, causing him to become bitter and violent. I think it's okay to feel bad for the monster, who didn't ask to be brought into this world where he would be rejected, but I can't fully justify hurting other people. I would be more willing to accept Frankenstein's monster as a villain who was in the right rather than Carrie White, because you could make the argument that the monster didn't know better. But then you start getting into the territory of maybe the monster is not the villain. Maybe Victor Frankenstein is the villain, the man who tried to play God by creating life, but failed to take responsibility for what he had created. You could argue that Victor Frankenstein was a villain who was in the right though. After all, he was just trying to advance humanity through science. Sure, he made mistakes, but it was in the pursuit of knowledge. If we consider him to be the villain, he would fall into a different category. Elijah Price was a boy born with a condition called osteogenesis imperfecta. His bones were extremely fragile, so he spent most of his life broken and in wheelchairs.
They call me Mr. Glass.
While he was physically very fragile, he was extremely gifted from a mental standpoint. He theorized that if someone like him exists on one end of the spectrum, there must be a hero who is incredibly durable on the other end. He carries out a series of terrorist attacks in search of this person, eventually finding a man named David Dunn, who is the only survivor of a train wreck caused by Mr. Glass. He spends the rest of the story encouraging David to take on the role of a superhero. When one of you guys suggested him as a villain who was in the right, it was because he made sacrifices with a noble goal and discovered an actual superhero who would go on to protect the city. The villains in this category mostly all fall under the same moral dilemma. It's basically a more complicated version of the infamous trolley problem. If 5 people are tied to one side of the track and one person is tied to the other, is it okay to pull the lever and kill the one person in order to save the 5? According to talkresource.com, about 90% of people would pull the lever and kill the one person to save the 5. So that settles it. Mr. Glass was in the right?
Actually, allow me to correct you.
The trolley problem only has 2 options, pull the lever or don't. Well, I always like to say that you could pull it at the merge point and derail the trolley. Depends if anyone's on the trolley and how fast it's going. But my point is, if I were in Mr. Glass's position and I believed there was a superhero out there who needed to be discovered, I wouldn't settle for a plan that involved killing other people. He could have just gotten involved in contacting survivors of the many accidents that already happened, or just held some kind of amateur sports tournament. There are definitely less evil ways he could have gone about it. But he essentially wanted to be the villain, because in his comic books, the hero and the villain are opposites in almost every way. Mr. Glass wasn't in the right, but I think we are getting closer. Our next villain also took up the diabolical podium out of what he saw as necessity, but the stakes were much higher. Lelouch Lamperouge from Code Geass wanted to overthrow the oppressive Britannian Empire, but makes many morally questionable sacrifices to do it, including controlling others, committing acts of terrorism, and betraying his friends.
What do you mean there's only soup? It means there's only soup. Well then get out of the soup aisle! Alright, you don't have to shout at me!
I love how there are gonna be people who watch this video who have never seen Code Geass and now they think that those are their actual voices.
What do you mean you're at soup?
A couple of you brought up Joseph Seed from Far Cry 5. Joseph was essentially a cult leader who believes that he was chosen by God to gather followers and lead them to Eden's gates to protect them from the incoming apocalypse. However, he's willing to use violence and torture to advance his goals. At one point, he pinches the tube on his own daughter's life support to kill her and prove his devotion to God. Under normal circumstances, he'd just be seen as your run-of-the-mill religious extremist, no better than some of the worst terrorists of our world. However, in the end, the apocalypse actually happened just as he predicted, down to the very moment, making it seem as if Joseph really was receiving the word of God. Given that information, it's hard to say that he wasn't in the right. Any of the evil actions that he took before this point don't really matter. Everyone who wasn't a follower of his would be wiped out anyway, so the guy did what he had to do to save humanity. The story has an interesting message, because the religious extremists of our world probably do believe that they're serving God and do see their evil actions as heroic. I think Joseph Seed forces the audience to see the world through their eyes. How do you deal with these people when they see themselves as divine? It's an interesting quandary. Disclaimer, although I do think Joseph is one of the best examples of a righteous villain, I am not condoning any kind of religious violence. I don't want to see any news articles about the CZsWorld pipeline, okay? The world of superheroes offers a couple other examples of villains in this category. Poison Ivy from Batman engages in acts of terror in defense of the environment. Thanos partook in what amounts to a mass genocide by snapping away half of all life in the universe, which he sees as a virtuous act to curb overpopulation and reduce strain on the world's resources. I hope I got that right. I'm not actually in the know when it comes to the world of Marvel, but I do know a little bit about Thanos just by being so into internet culture. I mean, the Thanos car, f***ing hilarious. Ant-Man's plan to defeat Thanos, one of the best things I've ever seen. Now, when I was making my list, there were some characters that I ended up moving into a subcategory. They weren't just sacrificing justice in the name of something they believe in, they were taking justice into their own hands. These are the Vigilantes. In the series known as Death Note, Light Yagami was a high school student who happened upon a notebook that had the power to kill anyone whose name is written into it. After testing it on a criminal who had taken hostages, he's horrified by its power and resolves to get rid of it. But then he has another idea. Light is going to use the notebook to take out all of the world's criminals so that only the good remain. He wants to create a new world, a utopia with no bad people or crime. This approach is popular, and Light, or as he becomes known, Kira, amasses followers all over the world who realize that someone is dishing out punishment to criminals and supports his endeavor. Others see him as just as bad or worse than those he is killing and seek to hunt down and arrest this new serial killer. The debate in the series has extended to real life, with fans arguing over whether Light was a good guy or a bad guy non-stop in the 20 years since the series came out. As a fan, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this series, so it's easy for me to see that while Light has good intentions, it is evil for any one man to be judge, jury, and executioner. The legal system has split up these roles for a reason. Having one person handle all three is too much power, and that leads to corruption, which is exactly what happens to Light. One person's judgment can never be unbiased and may not always be fair. Vigilante justice stories are something of a genre of their own. Billy from Silent Night Deadly Night similarly targeted those who were naughty before Christmas. Clyde Shelton from Law Abiding Citizen took revenge on corrupt police officers and criminals who were involved in the missentencing of a man who killed his wife and daughter. Similarly, Dexter Morgan from the TV series Dexter was a forensic specialist by day and serial killer by night, only going after heinous criminals who had escaped the legal system. Then there's John Kramer, or as he's more commonly known, Jigsaw from the Saw franchise, who subjected his targets to agonizing torture devices, which he believed would reinvigorate those who had lost their appreciation for life, assuming they survived. Don't worry, the video's not over. Perhaps the best example in the wider made sacrifices for the greater good genre would be the director from The Cabin in the Woods, the head of a secret organization whose goal is to sacrifice 5 human archetypes to a race of ancient gods living underground in order to entertain them and satisfy a ritual. If the ritual fails, the ancient ones will rise up and destroy the earth, so the organization puts a lot of resources into creating monsters capable of terrorizing and killing the young subjects. It's hard to argue against what the director and the rest of the organization are doing here, because they're literally saving the world the only way they know how. However, they may also fall into another category. One of the top answers to my query outside of Carrie White, which occupied the top 3 spots, was Parker Crane, also known as the Bride in Black from Insidious. As a boy, Parker was abused by his mother, Michelle, who forced him to dress up like a girl because she didn't like him going by the name that his father gave him.
That is not your name! Parker! Is not your name! That is the name your father gave you. Your name is Marilyn.
What's the clinical name for this type of behavior? Oh yeah, she kinda cray-cray. In life, she forced Parker to do horrible things, basically molding him into a serial killer.
If she sees you, she'll make me kill you.
Even after she died, she continued to manipulate him from the afterlife realm known as the Further. After she's eradicated from the Further, Parker basically just fades away. Parker did do evil things, but he was controlled from such a young age, and the grip was kept on him for so long that it almost seems like it was unavoidable. You could make the argument that Michelle is the main villain here, and I would agree with that, but Parker is technically a villain as well, as per our definition. I also have a special spot for Parker because my Black Bride video was the one where I did the fake brand deal for tap water, which is one of the dumbest gags that I've ever done. Make sure to use the code CZsWorld when purchasing tap water so they know that we sent you. You can just say it out loud whenever you turn on the faucet. And as much fun as that was, it didn't exactly pay the bills. So hopefully this does. We got an ad break. Jack Torrance is the main antagonist from The Shining. Jack is a teacher and father asked to take the job of the winter caretaker at the Overlook Hotel. But the Overlook Hotel is haunted, and Jack is possessed to go crazy and try to kill his family. Here's CZ! I actually said that at a Halloween party this year after showing up dressed like this. Note, you could make the argument for both versions, but the book version gives a heavier implication that Jack was possessed. When Danny has his final confrontation with him, he seems to realize this and says, "You're it, not my daddy. You're the hotel. And when you get what you want, you won't give my daddy anything because you're selfish." And after Jack regains control momentarily, he tells Danny to run away. Somebody in the comments had another suggestion. I'm gonna skip the obvious ones and say the mom from the Babadook. They did way too good a job of making that kid the whiniest and most unbearable child. Sorry, but I can't blame her reaction for most of the movie. It's a pretty funny comment because he's framing it to fit into the "they deserved it" category, which may be deserved. But realistically, we also gotta consider the puppet villain category. Amelia, the mother in the Babadook, is entranced to kill her dog and nearly her son when she's possessed by this monster from her child's bedtime story. This one is going to open up an interesting can of worms, or perhaps I should say bowl of worms, because the monster is a metaphor for her grief and depression, which she's unable to get under control. So on one hand, she can't use the puppet excuse. All of her actions are actually coming from her. She didn't get a handle on her grief, so it's her fault. However, you could make the argument that she's just a victim of the circumstances. Yes, she's mentally ill, but it largely stems from her husband's unexpected death. She didn't ask for any of it. Is it really her fault that she's struggling? Personally, I think you have to hold her accountable for what she did. If you give a pass to everyone who does something bad and blames it on mental illness, then every criminal is gonna use that excuse. In fact, you already see that happening. It seems like every apology video these days pulls the mental illness card. Now, that's not to say that those people don't deal with mental health problems, and I'm not trying to say that this isn't an issue, but think about it like this. There are plenty of people with grief and depression who don't try to kill their dog and son. If you have mental issues that you feel are controlling your behavior, it should be your responsibility to get a hold of it.
If you touch my son again, I'll fucking kill you!
But when it comes to puppet villains, it doesn't always have to be a supernatural puppeteer. Take Stu Macher from Scream. He was roped into a murder scheme when his high school friend tried to get revenge on his father's adulterous mistress and her daughter.
What's your motive?
Peer pressure. I'm far too sensitive.
But none of the puppet villain answers were upvoted as much as this one. Jaws. He was just living his best life and doing what sharks do. True. Boys gotta eat. That's our next category. We all know who Jaws is, right? Do I have to explain that one? He's a shark that ate some people. This is actually the answer that inspired me to create the different categories for this video. That and the fact that I crave structure in my life and in my videos. There are plenty of examples like this. Many of them are other animals who are just naturally hunting to survive. I think someone said the Indoraptor from Jurassic World. Jurassic boys. I will also add the Velociraptors from Velocicoaster. I know there's gonna be some vegan out there who's like,
Actually, allow me to correct you.
but these guys are carnivores, they have to eat meat to survive. Although the vegan Velociraptor does sound like a funny comedy sketch. It's not just animals though. Several horror movie villains that I've talked about are deities. Someone mentioned Sam from Trick or Treat. He's just the enforcer of what man created. Sam is basically a Halloween spirit who punishes those who do not adhere to the ancient traditions of the holiday Samhain,
Samhain,
which was the precursor to our Halloween. Speaking of people who deserved it, this character named Emma tries to take the Halloween decorations down on the night of, then says this.
I hate Halloween.
Nobody could possibly be considered in the wrong for murdering this bitch. Similar to Sam, and also made by the same director, we have Krampus. Instead of enforcing traditions of Celtic folklore, Krampus hails from Alpine and Nordic legends and protects the ancient traditions around Christmas. Someone on Threads mentioned the killer clowns from outer space, arguing that we eat things that are less intelligent than we are, so why shouldn't they? True. But on closer inspection, I'm not sure if we should trust this guy because he appears to be a killer clown from outer space himself. He might be trying to get us to accept our fate as cotton candy trees. Another one I thought of was Death from Final Destination. You could argue that death is not an entity, more so a concept or force of nature, but death is the closest thing we have to a villain in most of those movies. Each Final Destination film features a character who has a clairvoyant vision, allowing the character to save his or herself and several others from a horrible disaster. But because they were supposed to die that day, death keeps coming for them, and they have to figure out how before it's too late. I have one more example, and while it's not the perfect case for virtuous villainy, it's unique enough to go in a category all on its own. Midsummer is the 2019 folk horror film directed by Ari Aster. At the beginning of the movie, the protagonist, Dani Arter, loses her parents and sister in a horrible tragedy, and 6 months later, her boyfriend invites her to go on a trip to Sweden to experience the Midsummer Festival at the home village of his friend, Pell. Pell is immediately interested in Dani coming with.
You know, I'm very, very glad you're coming. I think it's very good you're coming.
Once there, he teaches Dani about how in their culture, everything is experienced together, including emotions like joy and sorrow. The reason he was excited to have her on the trip is because she's been grieving the loss of her family, and his family can help her bear the weight of that emotional burden. The American visitors are shocked and disgusted when they witness the Atestapa, a ritual suicide committed by the village elders after reaching age 72. But in their culture, this is normal, and it's considered an honor because the elders know that they'll never grow old enough to where caring for them becomes a burden. In the end, each of the foreign visitors, other than Dani, break one of the cult's rules and are offered up as a part of the sacrifice at the end of the Midsummer celebration, while Dani becomes their May Queen and joins the cult. We learned that Pell was planning it from the beginning. Their life cycle is broken up into seasons, and those aged 18 to 36 ethics are sent on a pilgrimage to meet people outside the family and bring them back for the purposes of reproduction with genetic variation, and of course to serve as fresh blood sacrifices during the burning ritual. While the international guests were disturbed and off-put seeing ritual suicide that they weren't used to, the cult members seem okay with it. There's a whole other debate to be had about the ethics of euthanasia. It's mostly frowned upon throughout the world today, but there are major nations where it's legal, like Belgium, Luxembourg, Canada, New Zealand, Spain, the Netherlands, and Colombia. It's a compelling debate that I'd be interested to learn more about. A lot of people online seem to support the idea, but obviously some are against any form of taking human life. It reminds me of the abortion debate, only it takes place on the other end of your life. But even if we ignore this particular issue, I can't say that Pell was in the right here. It's one thing to sacrifice yourself if your culture is accepting of it. He lost me when he sacrificed his friends, who didn't know what they were getting themselves into. Pell is definitely in the wrong on this one. Also, their family intentionally inbreeds one person who they refer to as their oracle because they claim that the mental deformities give him vision that is not clouded by normal cognition. You're intentionally giving someone a lifetime of medical problems. That's totally fucked up. But despite those issues, I think they were only bad to us is an interesting category, even though I could only think of one example, and that one example doesn't exactly qualify. If you can think of any others, let me know in the comments. I think the takeaway here is that most villains aren't perfect angels, and if they were, they wouldn't really be villains, would they? But the best ones, the ones that are the most fun to talk about, are the ones that have people on both sides of the aisle. The ones where you can have a discussion that turns into a discussion of ethics. A lot of YouTubers like to say, okay, let's keep it civil in the comments, but honestly, I kinda don't care. Feel free to rip each other apart in the comments. But in my opinion, it isn't actually that relevant if the person is actually in the right or in the wrong. It is those who think they are in the right, or at the very least, understand why they're in the wrong, and still see it fit to just push on anyway, who make the most compelling and memorable villains. Okay, I was about to finish the video, but we've got a late submission in the 11th hour. The blind guy from Don't Breathe. Girl, do you not remember the second half of that movie? But if you want to understand these morally ambiguous malefactors on a deeper level, then you're in luck, because I've already done deep dive analyses on many of them in my amazing and wonderful show called Horror History. You'll find a playlist of everyone I talked about today on the left. If you love analyzing evildoers as much as I do, make sure you subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell and select all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive. Okay, now it really is over.